everybody. I'm Raina from Blue Cypress Books, and welcome to Book Banter. I am very excited for you all to join me this evening. I'm going to be talking to Sheila Liming. She is an associate professor at Champlain College, and this is her third book, I'm pretty sure. It comes out next week, so it's not quite out yet. It's called Hanging Out: The Radical Power of Killing Time. This book kind of changed the way that I think about where I choose to spend my time hanging out and who with and like why. Really, she digs deep into that, and I'm excited to talk to her this evening about the book and so much more. If you guys have any questions at any point during the event, type them in the comments below and we will answer them during the event. So let me push this button and welcome Sheila onto Book Banter. Hi.
Hi. So happy to be here. And I love that intro.
Thank you. My husband gets all the credit for actually creating the intro and in an impressive amount of time. He's like, I have this idea. Would you like me to do that? And I'm like, sure. And maybe like 3 hours later, he's like, watch this. And I was like, okay, that's magic.
I love it. I love it.
So was I correct? This is your third book. Is that right?
Yeah, it is my third book.
All right, just checking. Like I had read different pieces, and I should have cleared that with you before, but
no, that's fine.
So tell me one of the things that the big questions I had is like, what gave you the idea for this book? So could you just to start give us a little bit about the book and where the idea came from?
So the book examines the concept of hanging out, which I define as basically spending unstructured time in the company of other people. And it was inspired by a lot of things. And like, depending on the day, I cite different sources or different references for where the idea for the book came from. Today, one of the ones I'm going to cite is that it came from this punk band that I like a lot, this band based out of Seattle, Washington, where I'm originally from. And they're called Childbirth, and they have this song, and the lyrics on the chorus are hanging out, doing whatever. And it's kind of making fun of like teenager speak, you know, like how you would refer to like hanging out with your friends when like you were in high school or something. But I love it because in making fun of it, it's also expressing this like very sweet truth too, that there's something really pleasant about spending time with people when you don't have an agenda and you're not trying to get anything out of them. And there's like nothing productive necessarily about what you're doing, which is like, you know, all I wanted to do when I was 17 years old. So I guess in some ways it brings me back to my memories of that. And that was part of what inspired me to it as well.
I love it. Yeah. That time when you literally just don't have anything pulling at you. And right. So you truly are just hanging out. Like there's, the maybe worst case, you're supposed to be home at a certain time. Like, and at some point, at least I did, you know, you start like just not showing up by 11, just nonchalantly not being there quite at the right time. So yeah. And now as an adult, I even feel like sometimes I feel more that pull. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go to work in the morning, or I have to do this thing. And like, if I don't get in bed by X time, like this, all you can see all of the things. So hanging out is very different today than it was.
Totally. And that's something I try to examine in the book is how like basically the more we age, the more this natural impulse kind of fades away in our life, but also the ability to make it happen, right? As our life becomes more and more structured, we are fitting things, including social time, into these like preordained little slots in our calendar. And there is just this sense that things don't get to be loose anymore. They don't get to just kind of happen in this casual sense. They have to be really, really programmed. And I think sometimes that like harms our social relations with each other. And so the book is kind of an exploration of how to reclaim that a little bit, how to get back to it, and also all the pressures that exist to put obstacles in our way to doing that.
Yeah, it is true. Like that, just the unstructured. That word in your description of hanging out is like the key word, because I can take a pottery class. I can, you know, go very specific things, go to a book event, go, you know, but like when was the last time I went and sat down somewhere with no agenda? Even if you only have like 3 hours, but with like almost no agenda, I'm literally just going to enjoy this coffee and enjoy this view And if someone I know walks in, that'll be fine and I can talk to them, or a stranger. I guess one of the times that I do get that is when I'm on vacation.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah. And what, I guess, since you've done all of this research on hanging out, what do you think is different about that, really?
So I'm glad you brought up that point. And that's something that I do think about, even though I don't deal with it, expressly in the book. I moved to Vermont about 2 years ago. This is my second year in Vermont. And so I moved here in the middle of the pandemic. Previously, I was living in North Dakota. And originally I'm from Washington State. So I've been all over the place. I've moved a lot in the United States. And I would often get back to visit my family members in Washington. And I was always conscious of the fact that when I was visiting them there, like, their normal lives were still happening. They still had work, they still had responsibilities, they still had to like feed their cats or whatever, like various things pulling at them. And so a couple of years into living in North Dakota, I made this suggestion that was like, what if we all went on vacation together? What if we met up somewhere in between our two states, which happened to be Montana? So we started doing these vacations to Montana where the whole family would just kind of converge, and then more people started to get involved from multiple sides of the family. It became this convergence reunion thing. And it was the best because nobody had responsibilities when they were there. And so like our relationships were easier. Our interactions were easier. We didn't have this sense that, we had to like run away from whatever we were doing with each other to like go handle something that had to be dealt with. And it did provide this kind of like blank neutral space in which to like just feel a little bit more casual about our relationships.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. When you're visiting, even if it's family or really, really good friend or anything, there is also this pressure on the person who's hosting to perform in some way. Make sure you have dinner. Make sure you're okay.
Yes.
And then for me, when I'm the one visiting, help with the dishes, help with this, and I do feel like even if I'm completely comfortable, there's a level of burden that I am in that situation, right? If I'm the one visiting. And you're right, if you like rent an Airbnb and you all get together, you still need to make sure the dishes are done, but we're all in this together. There's no there's no pressure for one person to perform and the other one to like make sure they're covering.
Yeah, there's no feeling of like I'm entering into somebody else's space. So I have to like figure out the rules of being in their space and like make sure that I don't infringe upon them or something. Right.
Actually, for the first time, my family and I did that right after Christmas. We usually, my mom and my sister live in Florida, so it's close enough where a full day you can drive and get there. And usually sometime around Christmas, one of us will go all the way and we'll sort of gift exchange for a day and hang out and drive all the way back. And this time we rented a place in Tallahassee. So they drove halfway and we drove halfway. And it was only one night. But it was really different and a lot of fun. And you're right, we're like all on the same page there. So that was really
good. That's awesome. I'm glad it worked out.
So one thing you do, well, there's a couple things you do in this book that I really love. You set up each chapter is like a different type of hanging out. And then you have these personal stories. And I always wonder this about like these personal stories, but I get to ask you because you're here. Do you have like journals and stuff or are you just recalling this? There's this night that you go out on the town, right? And you meet people and you're going from bar to bar and just like, you do an amazing job putting me there. And I'm on this journey with you. And did you just recall all of that and piece it together? Or do you have like photos or journal entries or where do you get those?
A lot of it is recollection. But a lot of it is also taken from photos. So on that particular trip, which I talk about in the chapter that's on hanging out with strangers, I had my camera with me and like, I still have those photos. And so as I was writing that chapter, I started going through the photos, which of course are in order of like how everything unfolded that night. So like they take me from during the day where I'm like walking around by myself in this city where I don't know anybody to like suddenly it's evening. And then there's all these pictures of these strangers. And then there's like pictures of me with the strangers and we're all like hugging each other and stuff. And I have never seen them since. We had one great night with each other. We never talked to each other again. And now I have these photos that'll last me a lifetime of like me and 5 strangers. And we're just like hugging and looking like we've known each other for years.
It's like, it's good that you've written this story instead of someone else has stumbled upon them. And they're like, who are these people? Where do we find them? Like going back through other photos, trying to cross-reference and figure out. Yeah, no, I love that.
I think I do have like a strong memory. I think a lot of writers do, right? It's something that you kind of pick up in the act of writing, because writing is all about paying attention to things. And so the more you practice that art, the more you just start to like remember things. But it's something that actually my partner complains about, is that I will remember things in a very detailed way and then bring them back. And then he'll be like, God, I wish you would just forget that, so we don't have to talk about it anymore.
That is hilarious. I believe I also have a memory like that. Some people don't agree.
Well, and that's when you run into trouble, right? Is when you try to like take your story and line it up against someone else's, and then they're like, oh no, that's not how it happened.
It works out that you have not been in contact with those people. You're just like, this is my story.
It does. Yeah.
How did you research this? Like, what research did you do for Hanging Out?
I did do some research. Part of it is that, I spent some time thinking through, what I would think of as like my literary archive. I mean, I'm an English teacher and a writing teacher. I read a lot. I watch a lot of movies. I consume a lot of media. So that's always my first sort of like touch point when I'm thinking about these bigger concepts, is like, where else have I seen this before? And I'll go back and I'll kind of look through the books that I've read, and I'll think about, okay, what are some great and famous representations of parties that I remember from books that I've read, or famous representation of dinner parties or something like that. So I'll go back and I'll look at that stuff and read through it, and, watch movies that remind me of the subject. And there's a whole bunch of, references that I would come up with and research that I would do that wouldn't end up making it into the book, but that's okay. It was more part of that process.
Mm-hmm. I really have to find that short. Speaking of dinner parties, like you're describing it, and I'm like, I've never heard of this before, but I have to find it. What is it? Next Floor?
Next Floor. Yeah.
Floor. Okay.
It's super good. Like for a short film that has no dialogue, you totally get the story and you totally figure out what's going on, and it's really beautiful.
Yes. I was I was a theater kid. So one of the competitions that we went to, there's a one act, and it stuck in my head, and I still don't know what the name of it is or the title, but there were no words. No one. It was 2 characters that were puppets, and it was just everyone in the audience is just bawling at the end of it, and I can't figure out how to Google it because there's no words. Puppets, mime does not do what you might think. It doesn't get you. It does not go. One day I'm gonna find it, but it doesn't. It doesn't need the words to set the tone for sure.
Right.
One thing that I thought of in Hanging Out, and something that's actually kind of happening in my life, is I have a teenager. So pre-teenagers, like the last year or so, Hanging Out was more for me, or as much for me as it was for him. And they, play dates, meetups, these other words for hanging out. And now he's trying to find the word for it. And it's very interesting watching another human like develop this true hanging out. And I don't know, do you remember that? Like when
totally remember that. Yes. I totally remember that. And I love that your teenager is going through that transition right now from, the activities that other people set for you to like creating your own kind of agenda and making your own choices about it. And then also trying to find the way that you want to describe it and talk about what you're doing.
Right. Sometimes like I'll take him somewhere and I'll call it a play date, which it's not, right? But
he's like, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're
right.
too old.
He's like, oh God, Mom, And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, you know what I mean. But like, I'm still like, when you're doing it on your own, you call it what you want. But then when I'm driving you to it, or, you know, help set it up in my head, it's still play date. No.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not. And that's another thing, like a building unstructured time for people. Because you have, there's the chapter that's, you talk about conferences. And that's sort of like a conference is kind of like the structure has been, like the playground has been built, and then you're thrown in it. So it's like someone else is attempting to structure your time, but then what you do inside that.
Exactly. And I was actually just at a conference 2 weeks ago for the first time in 3 years. Like for the first time that I've been to like an in-person conference. I've done some online ones, but you know, everything was on hiatus for a couple of years. And now we're sort of back together, but this conference, which is normally huge, was actually a bit diminished. It was like down to about a third of its normal attendance, you know, because of lingering effects of COVID. And then part of the conference was still online and everything like that. So it was like small and it was like intimate. And it was different from how I remember. There was less walking around and posturing, and there was more making connections, like actually having time to talk to people and hang out with them. And it was really nice. And I saw a friend and a colleague who I've known for many years, who's like been a really good colleague, who's like read a lot of my writing. I've read a lot of his, you know, I really trust this guy. Like we get along great. And I saw him like the first night of the conference, and it was like at this like crowded event in a bar. And he totally threw some shade at me. He like said some very snotty stuff about like my writing. And I couldn't tell the tone of it. It was kind of strange. And so like, I went to bed that night, like all pissed off. I'm like, oh, he was so rude to me. What a dick. And then I ran into him the next day at the conference and I was like, so you were totally rude to me. And he was like, I totally didn't mean to. I'm so sorry. And so it's like, we actually got to go through the whole, like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I apologize. Then he like came to my presentation to make it up to me. So we went all the way through the fight and the makeup, like during the time that we were at the conference, and it ended fine. So.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. And you're just like, you've hit all of the steps. I love it. Well, I mean, very adult of you, by the way. Pat on the back. Like everyone deserves that, because it's not that easy. Like in the movies and stuff, people are like to say their feelings all the time. Not all the time, but like if it's that kind of movie. And like you gotta decide, and you gotta be ready in real life to deal with that. So good job you, and congratulations for it all like working itself out. So that's amazing. What is your favorite way to hang out?
Favorites.
What's a favorite way to hang out? It doesn't have to be the ultimate favorite way.
So a friend of mine, there was a review in an article about the book that was published today in The Guardian. And a friend of mine, or a former colleague, like at a school that I used to work at, and I don't work there anymore, saw it and like sent me a text message. I didn't even know I was still in his phone. I didn't know he was still in mine, that type of thing, right? Like we drifted apart. Also, I left the job. And he was texting me and he was like, remember these days when our offices used to be located next to each other and we would just go in and out of each other's offices and we would just like hang out all the time? Like I would just come in to ask you a question and then I'd sit down in your chair and I'd stay there for an hour and like you'd make me tea and then we'd chill and then we'd go back to work, right? And I loved that because that was actually like an intellectually very stimulating part of my day. You know, being able to have somebody there to talk to, bounce ideas off, or just kind of like explore things with a little bit. And then we would go back to doing whatever we were doing. But then the work we were doing felt less lonely. It was like, well, there's somebody there. And if I ever need him, you know, we can talk to each other. So I appreciated the fact that he thought of that and he bothered to like reach out and remind me of that. Because even though neither of us are in that job anymore and we don't have offices next to each other, like he remembers that interaction. So I don't know if that's a favorite way for me to hang out, but like I really appreciate those kinds of interactions. And people like bother to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't like, those are ones you can't really recreate, like having these are a lot of different pieces came together, and then being comfortable enough with somebody to have that relationship, and also then go back. There's no pressure, like, oh yeah, I have to work too, like, you know, and do that. Yeah, those are good. Those are good. The
Mhm.
ones that are like intellectually stimulating, but also there's no pressure involved
Yes.
in them.
I also will say that I love being a guest in somebody's house overnight because like I get so much time to hang out with them, and I also learn so much about them. Like seeing how somebody else lives, like what they eat and how they organize things and how they live their day and everything. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, we're not comparing. I'm just learning things.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So Linda asked, where do you not want to hang out?
Oh, plenty of places. One of them is baby showers. I hate baby showers. Those are just not fun parties to me. They're part of these like kind of like rituals that we have in our culture for certain forms of like sanctioned hanging out that actually aren't very fun. So everybody shows up like expecting to have a bad time. Another thing is kind of like planned work retreats, things like that, where it's like, we're going to have a retreat, but like really we're having 7 meetings in a row. So like everybody just shows up like, oh, I don't want to do this. So they're in a bad mood. And, that kind of hanging out ends up not being fun because it's like forced, it's coerced.
Yes. Yeah. And that's kind of gray area then, that unstructured. So that's another one of those situations where they're faking the structure. Like, no, I mean, you don't have to, but come on over here and have a seat. Like,
yeah. Like, I totally want to buy you a present for your baby. I love babies and I love outfitting babies. I don't want to go to your baby shower.
I do not want to play those silly games.
I know. That's exactly it. The games. Oh, they're the worst. It's because nobody knows what to do at a baby shower. It's like we don't have a good way to spend that time with each other aside from the gifts. So we have to invent things.
Yeah, it's true. And I understand why we do it before the baby's born. I really do get that. But at the same time, I really want to play with the baby. So
yeah, right. That would make it so much more fun.
Let's just wait 8 weeks and then do a baby shower. Then you can even send the gift ahead of time. Like, yes, you need the swing. Take it ahead of time. And then let's all come and like eat cake and hang out when the baby's like a couple months old, because that's really what we all want to do.
Totally.
Yeah. I don't know if we can pitch that. Who do we pitch that? To just start the trend. I don't think I am not going to remember the country, but there is definitely I want to say it's like the Scandinavian countries. I was in Iceland over the summer and they do a similar thing, but I can't remember the name of it. And I think other Scandinavian countries do as well, where they do have a party after the baby is born.
I like that.
And you still invite people with other children, you invite single people, like a baby shower, but afterwards. And that's kind of where you reveal like their name and things like that. And I was like, I'm much more into that.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah.
So Devin has a question. I believe Sheila touches upon the concept of third places. How can residents or city governments create better places to hang out? That's good.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's something that like I have some strong opinions about, from having lived in various spaces that I think sometimes actually create barriers to social activity and hanging out, especially with members of your own community. And one of them has to do with constructing spaces that are either free or extremely low cost to hang out in that actually bring together a bunch of people of like diverse age groups and diverse kind of backgrounds. So these are family-friendly spaces. They're spaces where elderly individuals feel comfortable hanging out. They're places where like you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money in order to be there, and where you don't feel like there's any like kind of like time ticking clock that's going to kick you out at a certain point of time. And I developed this concept. This is the place I learned this concept when I was young from a bookstore that I really, really cared about when I was growing up. And I talk about it in the book. It's called Third Place Books, and it was in the neighborhood where I grew up, which was, a kind of unremarkable suburb of the city of Seattle. But this bookstore moved in, and it moved in when I was 13, and it changed the character of our neighborhood and the way that we spent our time. So it moved into this kind of like shopping plaza near my house, but it was walkable. I could get there, and so could a bunch of other people. And I never had heard of the idea of the third place until this bookstore moved in, calling itself that, and talked very like stridently about Ray Oldberg and his work. And the great thing about it was that it was a bookstore with a food court. So you could come in and you could buy books and you can shop for books, but there was also this other side, and it's still there, where there's just kind of like open seating, and there was a couple of like food stations. So you could get a cup of coffee or not. There was like a child play area where you could hang out with your kids. There was, a place to buy lunch. And because it was open pretty much all day, from early in the morning until late at night, like you could spend a decent amount of time there and see a whole bunch of different people from your community. So it really did become this kind of like home away from home. I really appreciated it for that. And I think that bookstores and libraries continue to play that role in our communities. As long as they're able to do so. Of course, like, skyrocketing rents for real estate property and libraries that are underfunded and under-resourced make that kind of an issue for people. So one thing that local governments can do is invest in these things and invest in these spaces. And also, if we can, curb some of those skyrocketing rents to make sure that there's spaces available for people to actually like build these businesses too.
Absolutely. I every bookstore I know, indie bookstore, strives to be a community center.
Totally,
as well.
Totally.
Not just with events, but just with like being a safe space. Like come to the store, hang out. Literally, come hang out with us. Talk books. We love talking books. Grab a book, have a seat, hang out for a while. Like we don't have a coffee shop attached to us, but there's 2 coffee shops across, like within half a block, depending on which direction you want to walk. Yeah. And both of them are great community spaces. They sit and just hang out and everyone is totally cool with that. So like within like 1 block, you can make this triangle between coffee shops and the bookstore and it's really amazing. And I helping bookstores and other maybe retail establishment, but other businesses be able to have space that's available for gathering. Because if you have a retail establishment, you're like, okay, square footage, right? Everyone's about square footage and how much does that make? And you have to keep that in your head because that's how you stay open. But ways to help places be able to have space that isn't chock full of whatever you're trying to sell.
That's huge. There's a coffee shop that recently opened in my neighborhood here in Vermont. And I have a wonderful little neighborhood. I have 3 coffee shops within walking distance. I'm a happy person. But one of them just opened that serves amazing coffee and is like the size of a postage stamp and is the worst place to hang out ever. It's like one awkward counter. It's dead silent in there. Like you feel like you're breaking some law by being in there and trying to like read a book. So like space matters, right? And we have to like build space so that people can actually occupy it.
Exactly. So Michael is asking, might I relay a question from John Lindgren in Pennsylvania? So this is from actually John. Do you have any thoughts on the durability of books as artifacts for preserving the best that has been thought and said?
We have a Matthew Arnold fan on our hands, I think, with the best that has been thought and said. And that's okay. Matthew Arnold references are welcome around here. I do have thoughts on physical media. And I say this as someone who's currently surrounded by physical media. As you can tell, there's a lot of it in my life. I'm a college professor, so I interact a lot with young people between the ages of 18 and 24, which is, sort of my bulk of my college student population. And one thing, that I'm constantly talking about with my students is, what sort of physical media do you invest in? Do you care about? And many of them care about vinyl records, right? Vinyl records are experiencing kind of a resurgence these days. It was just a couple of years ago that vinyl record sales actually caught up with CD and other media sales too, and became equal to it, not MP3, but basically any other physical media. So records are back again. We've kind of seen this renaissance. And I think it's because people view it as this investment in something they really, really care about. So yes, you've heard the song before. You can download it on Spotify maybe anytime you want to. But there's always this sense that like, if you care about it enough, you want that physical thing that you can always come back to, the thing that's going to have the trace of your ownership, where your memories are going to be. And I think that books are the same way. And I think a lot of people still view them that way. I also think that increasingly, as our lives become more and more immaterial, and it feels like we're leaving so much of it in this space where there isn't any physical reality, that books are going to continue to become important in that way. For preserving the sake of the best that's thought and said, but also for preserving our interactions with text, with thoughts, with ideas, with stories. I can't throw my books away because I write in all of them. And so it's not just for me about the book itself. It's also about like what I was thinking as I was reading it. And some of that stuff is really embarrassing, like the notes I took in my books when I was 17 years old, but I still have them because they do remind me of somewhere else that I've been, and also of this thing that I want to keep coming back to.
Mm-hmm. Books can hold so much, not just what's on the page, what the author put in there, but where you bought it, when you read it, where you were when you read it. I keep all the books. If I take a book on vacation or purchase a book on vacation, if it's read there, I always keep it. And I'm like, sometimes people take a book and they're like, oh, I'll just leave it. I'm like, but I have to bring it back because I literally read it on the plane to Iceland. So like, I will remember that. And I keep those. I don't make as many notes as you do in your books, but I keep them because I will remember both things.
And for those of us who are, kind of spatial learners too, I think sometimes our relationship to what we remember from a book, we'll remember where we saw it on the page. And so if you go back to it, you're like looking for that spot in the text, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was on the left-hand side. It was a paragraph about this big, and he said something about whatever. And I want to go and look that up. So, I mean, that facilitates that interaction. And, I got to tell you, we have all these fancy new ways to read books on screens and stuff, but the codex format, the book, is just easier to navigate than all of them. It's still easier to flip pages than it is to scroll through stuff.
Yep, I could not agree more. I always have a book on my phone, and it takes me over a year to read it because I just keep it there in case, like, I get a flat tire or I'm stuck at a doctor's office longer than I thought I was going to be, or something. Like, I do have something to read in case I don't have an actual book with me, but it takes forever to finish because it's like an emergencies only book.
I love that. It's like an emergency book that you just keep reading at all time.
Exactly. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Mike. Miley. Hi.
Thank you so much for the recommendation, Mike. It's working out famously. I appreciate that. Okay, so he has 3 comments that ends in a question. So I'm going to just read the whole thing. Mike says, I've frequently yearned to return to that time in college when friends just wound up at the same house or bar every Friday, totally unplanned and effortless. But I also at times dismiss those yearnings as childish or immature or something that's no longer possible. But I also can't say why that's so. What should I tell that so-called mature side of myself who thinks this can't happen anymore?
Well, I don't think there's anything childish about yearning for serendipity and for these more kinds of like organic ways of being in each other's lives, as opposed to the way that, maturity teaches us that, well, everybody's so busy. If you want to hang out with them or if you want them in your life, you're going to have to like schedule it. Like, I often think about how everyone now has to make it a reservation with you in order to make a phone call. Remember when people just called you? Right? But now nobody's going to answer the phone, or there's that fear that nobody's going to answer the phone. So like they have to send the text message or the email that asks you if it's okay to call ahead of time so that you have the date for the call. And, the phone, like, it will just ring. You can pick it up, right? But I don't think there's anything childish about that, Mike. I mean, obviously, I wrote a book about it. I think it's a good thing. But I also think at a more fundamental level, there's something really essential to the democratic society that we live in thinking about how we want these random occurrences to be a part of our life. And that we care about people who are not necessarily just like right here in our orbit, not just like living with us or like part of our family or our close friend network, that we care about people who maybe we don't get to see as often, and that it's important for us to keep those people in our lives. And random connections, chance happenings, casual hangouts are one way to do that, to keep those connections alive. Democracy only works, right, if we all care about each other. If we stop caring about each other, if we say, I don't care what's happening to that person overall, well, then it gets a lot harder.
Absolutely. And I find that so living in New Orleans, you were talking about having like 3 coffee shops within walking distance. I also have like 3 or 4 coffee shops within walking distance. And like within walking distance, I have a billion bars because I'm close enough to the French Quarter. But like within a few blocks, I have two bars as well. And it doesn't take long for that sort of serendipity to happen. Mm-hmm. If I go over every Thursday for 3 weeks, by that 3rd Thursday, it's the same. There's a couple of people that are the same people. And then it's just about, am I going to talk to them? Right? Am I going to just sit on my side and acknowledge that I know them, like I've seen them before? Or am I going to make that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's a group of musicians that I hang out with every Tuesday night, or at least that's the designated time for our hangouts. And like, we don't hang out in a fancy place. We hang out in a high school cafeteria. It's pretty bleak, but we play our music together. And the idea is like, you build this rapport, right? You go a lot, and then after a while, if you like don't show up for a while, or maybe you can't, like somebody's like, oh, where's Sheila? What's going on? Somebody should check in with her and see what's up. Maybe she's just busy or whatever. But and I start to do the same things when I notice that somebody hasn't been around for a while. What's going on? Are they still playing music? Maybe I can send them an email and just figure out what's going on. So I think having those kind of, routinized hangouts are good too. Or even just places where you can expect to be able to find people if you leave your house and go in search of them.
Yeah. Even I sometimes will go to other coffee shops.
Like shift it up.
Yeah. Well, it's true though, because you will run into the same sort of neighbors here, and that's cool. But if you're not looking really to be noticed by your neighbor and then have them come talk to you about the fence, for example, there's something to be said for that too. But then if you want, sometimes I'm trying to I think relive those vacation moments where you're in a coffee shop where you don't know anybody, but you're all in the same moment. Going across town to a different coffee shop and having a seat and having a coffee. And even if you don't talk to anybody, there's something to be said about just getting out there with the people and being on the same page. Some of you are reading and some of you are working on your laptop, and you're all just sort of hanging out in this same environment.
And overhearing conversations, like listening to other people, hearing what they're talking about, what they're into, listening to them talk about the books that they're reading, things like that too.
Absolutely. Airports are amazing for overhearing conversations.
They are amazing.
Love that. If there's a layover or a delay that does not mess up my entire vacation, I don't mind if that gets pushed back an extra hour, because it's cool. I'm just going to sit right here and just listen and observe everything that's going on around me, and it's worth the hour.
Airports are an amazing slice of life, and I feel the same way. As long as it's a nice airport, and one of my favorites is the Minneapolis airport, my favorite airport in the nation. It is so perfect. It's the right size. It has so many amenities. It has a wonderful bookstore in it as well, which really helps, and wonderful ramen and all sorts of other things. But I remember I was sitting in that airport once on a layover, and I was looking at this guy who had this instrument in a music case, and I was trying to figure out what instrument it was. I was trying to just figure it out by the case, and I was like, bouzouki, a mandolin, I don't know. So finally I asked him, and it turns out it's this weird 15th century lute thing from Italy. Wow. Totally not what I was guessing. And I was like, wow, I've never heard one of those before. And he's like, do you want me to play it? I'll play it right now. And he takes it out and plays it in the airport. I'm like, yes, I want to hear it.
Yes, I do. Glad you offered. Okay. Absolutely. So was there anything you had to cut from the book that you wanted, because I said, every chapter is kind of a different place or a different way to hang out. Was there something that you wanted to add but you couldn't, or chose not to?
Plenty of things. The chapter that I struggled with the most, that was the hardest to get together, was the chapter on dinner parties, because I had a lot of different ideas that I wanted to talk about there, and I went through several drafts of that chapter, and I ended up dispensing with some of those ideas. Even though I still loved them, they just weren't quite working within the things that I was saying. And one of them was actually about the artwork by the artist Judy Chicago that's called The Dinner Party. It's a famous piece of 70s feminist artwork. And I wanted to talk about the time that I actually went to see that piece of art at the Brooklyn Museum. And it was so cool to me, because even though I find the artwork itself a little embarrassing, it's a little I don't know, kind of cliche 70s feminism. It's portraits of vaginas and things like that. But the experience of going to see it, because it's really, really big, was so cool, because of the way it forces everyone who's there in the room to walk around it and keep walking around it. And also because it's all made out of concrete and tile, it refracts sound. So you hear everybody else's conversations. So everybody in the gallery is their voices come right to you. You can hear what they're whispering about the artwork and everything. And I loved that it just didn't quite work with what I was saying in the chapter. So I didn't get to talk about Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, maybe for the best, because I wasn't quite ready to talk about it. So.
Well, it kind of sounds amazing. And where is it? Where's
It's at the Brooklyn Museum.
Okay.
And it was originally produced for an art exhibit in California, and it premiered in the 70s, and then it went into storage for like a really long time, like 30 years, because it's huge and nobody wanted it. And then it came out of storage and it got a permanent home. So now you can see it there.
Nice. Nice. An artwork that is large, and especially like stuff that you have seen images of and you have no real idea how big it is, and then you get to see it and it's like massive, and now it takes on this entirely new life.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. I just had that experience in San Francisco 2 weeks ago with a Diego Rivera mural, which I had seen photos of, for a long time, like in art books. And then I finally got to see it in person. And yeah, there were like, 50 people in front of it, just kind of like stunned and staring at it and like interpreting it and talking about it. And that was fun to kind of like talk to strangers a little bit. Like, what do you see in it? And
oh yeah, absolutely. And yet again, we've stumbled upon another hanging out, right?
Yeah.
And in art museums and things like that, it is interesting because you don't intermingle and talk too much to people that you don't know until you get to a piece you can't not say something about.
Right.
That is just so shocking or so large or so beautiful or something. And then it's like you're all sharing this moment, even though you've all been in the museum together for 2 hours at this point. You've seen them, they're a little behind you or a little in front of you, but you haven't really, you've pretended like you can't see them. Like neighbors in this city, I pretend I can't see my neighbor's backyard, and he pretends he can't see mine. I mean, you do that, right? Because you're all having your own personal experiences until you're in the room with something that you're like, I know, right? And you're like, now you know this guy because you've been half seeing each other for 2 hours. But now you're having this sort of experience.
Exactly true. Now you make me wish that I'd written about art museums, because now this is making me think about so many other ththings too.
I mean, there's an article in here or an edition or something later, or you can add it in. Absolutely. So tell me and I know that this book isn't even out yet, but where are you headed? What is your next thought? What are you thinking? Where are you going?
Don't make me say that. Not until the book's out. I have thoughts and I have ideas that have been stirring for like where I go next, but I'm like refusing to allow myself to think about them too seriously, because right now I really just want to do I want to kind of revel in this moment. I think the best moment is the moment right before something you've been waiting for happens. It's this moment of like anxiety, but it's also excitement. And then it happens and it's over. So it's like, I get this moment right now and I'm trying just to stay with it until the book's out. But yeah, I got some ideas brewing later down the line. So I will give them full space.
There will be more. There will be
more.
You're not just hanging up the hat after hanging out.
But you do get this feeling when you write a book sometimes. And I had it with the other two too. That like, when you get done with it, you're like, I'm not sure I can ever do that again. That was exhausting. But then like you give it 6 months and you're like, nah, I want to do it again.
Yeah, you're like that little bitty spark of a thought is now just been sitting there for this long, and you're like, well, I got to put that somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Let's just put it over here and see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah,
I love it. So I just want to thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such fun. And I wish I could be there in New Orleans and see the bookstore itself and everything. Maybe I'll get the chance to at some point in time.
Well, next time you're in town, definitely let me know. We'll get all of your books and have you sign them on the page, and it will be amazing.
That would be so cool.
And thank you to everybody who was watching and everybody who posted comments and questions. We truly appreciate it. I am going to grab this link, which I didn't have ready, but it's here now. Grab a copy of Sheila's book. It does not come out until next Tuesday, but if you use the link or give us a call at the bookstore, we will have one fresh and ready for you Tuesday morning when it comes out. And Sheila, again, thank you so much for joining me for Book Banter.
Thank you too. This was so fun.
All right.